All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Humber. I am the VP of Marketing at Ryff, and I'll be your sponsor for today's panel on the subject of virtual product placement, or VPP. By show of hands, who knows what the term VPP means and is familiar with the term? All right. That's a few hands. So look, we've all heard of product placement. It's an industry that's been around for 100 plus years, but it's been a highly manual, very expensive process, and one that's frankly very disruptive to content creators. VPP changes all of this, taking advantage of the latest graphics technologies and AI to find authentic digital placements for brands in scene, in content. Why is it important to today's today's advertising landscape? Because capturing consumer attention has never been harder. We are all exposed to 3,000 plus brands a day, so cutting through that noise and rising to the top has become a challenge. Advertisers need to become more creative and more innovative in how they connect to their audiences, how they drive positive brand sentiment, and most importantly, drive intent to purchase. So, to discuss this topic, we have an excellent panel representing the world's leading Spanish language media company, Televisa Univision, top creative ad agency, MediaCom, and the leading global provider of virtual product placement solutions, Ryff. So let's jump into a few introductions real quick, and then we'll get stuck into the questions. So Luis de la Parra, down the end. Luis is a 20-year veteran of media marketing and TV promotion, specializing in using media communications to solve complex business problems. As Senior Vice President of Partner Solutions at Televisa Univision, Luis is responsible for all their integrated teams in driving campaigns for America's leading corporations, all the way from ideation, streaming, social, and linear executions. Welcome, Luis.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Mar in the middle, Mar with Marjolaine Doormeyer. I'm just going to call you Mar to save myself the embarrassment. With a career spanning Discovery, Fox, and Sony, Mar is Chief Content Officer at Ryff, where she oversees all content partnerships and advocates for the industry to provide content for brand integration. Prior to Ryff, Mar played key roles in creating Insight TV, a 4K global linear and digital channel, and at Endemol Shine, where she led the global brand operations department. Welcome, Mar.
Thank you.
Jeff Simones, to my immediate right, managing partner and head of social media for MediaCom, with clients including YouTube, American Airlines, Mars, Dell, Sony PlayStation, and more. Jeff oversees business growth, client relations, and inspires the team's delivery of award-winning work. Prior, Jeff was co-founder and president of M80, Group M Social Specialists in North America, who were acquired by WPP in 2006. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Quick 2 seconds on me. I've been marketing technology since before email existed, I'm ashamed to say. Spent a decade with NVIDIA, developed a passion for storytelling using graphics technology, which very naturally brought me to Ryff all of 6 weeks ago. I've quite literally seen something every day of working with Ryff that's blown my mind. So I'm very excited about what this technology is capable of, and very happy to be here on this panel. So let's get started. As I always like to kick off with a little icebreaker. So I asked the panel to come up with their one product placement that they can't forget and why. And let's start down the end with Luis.
You know, the one that I can always think of, it's been forever, it's Nike, right? When you see Nike, you see it everywhere, right? You see it on sports, basically, but they don't talk about it. You just see it on jerseys, shoes, what have you. That's the best product placement that you could possibly buy. Everybody will always talk about it, feel good about it. It's always brand love for Nike, right? So that to me is the one that I love the most.
And they sponsored the shoes for the...
yeah, and they pay me for that.
Yeah, for me, it's when I got the question, I immediately had to think about E.T. It was one of the first, it was when I was a kid, and it was the Reese's chocolates. I was born and raised in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and we didn't know the brand. We never heard of the brand. And when I started working with product placement and diving a little bit into the whole VPP area, that came up all the time because it was such a tremendous uplift for the brand. I think it was 85%, and so it showed how strong product placement can be.
when we were preparing for today, I was like, you can't have E.T.
I could.
But I gotta say, I'm sticking with E.T. because my memorable moment of product placement from that film was not the candy, which was so prominent. But when I was a kid at that time, I was really into BMX bikes, and I don't know if you remember the bike that was featured. It was such an important part of that scene when he's taking back off. But the E.T. Kuwahara was a thing when I was 10 years old, and I think I searched since last year was the 40th anniversary of that. Don't do the math, please. But anyway, it's just funny that we're having all this preparation for today, and all the moments that you could cite for memorable product placement, and we both thought of E.T. for two reasons. Hats off Spielberg.
Yeah.
Which is
I'm pretty sure you're going to be buying that edition bike, aren't you? Yeah, for me, actually, it was the gold-framed aviators from Top Gun. I was 12. You can do the math if you want. I'm not ashamed. But yeah, 12 years old, demanding a pair of gold-framed aviators was an interesting look. I didn't get the Ray-Bans at first. They were slightly cheap knockoffs, but they looked the same. But I loved those glasses. All right, so what are some of the challenges that you see in advertising today across digital and linear, and what role do you see virtual product placement playing to address those challenges? Jeff, you want to start us off on that one?
I mean, you guys will hear all week about all the changes that are happening in the media landscape, and we'll get into some of that a bit later. But for me, I think product placement, and particularly virtual product placement, has an opportunity to inject a level of cultural relevance into the media mix today that's enables things at a scale that wasn't possible before. If you think about if you wanted your brand, your product, or images in production, you needed to get it there, be present, plan it well ahead of time, commit the resources and all of that. Nowadays, if we have an idea and we have the rights to do it, we can turn this around in 24, 48 hours. And it's pretty incredible. You mentioned the mind-blowing things that you've seen in your short time at Ryff. Same for me. Some of the things that we've been able to do in just a really, really quick turnaround is remarkable. So it's really about cultural relevance for me.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, and if you look at challenges on advertising, I always like to look at my kids because they're the future for the advertisers. And if I see them, it's very hard to make them watch any advertisement. So it's hard to bring them sometimes to linear channels, but if anything that comes up, they're finding ways to click it away and to get and I think that is a challenge because you still want to have that advertising and you need to have the advertising budgets as well. So for me, it's the challenge, how can you replace it? How can you grow that? How can you keep that?
Yeah, I mean, I see a share of attention, right, for any brand, and then, the complexity and that resources bring to the fold, right? I mean, I see agencies and clients alike not having the resources to do complex branded content, story arcs, So how do you do that? How do you create share of attention across platforms, right? So I see, for instance, virtual product placement as a great solution to immediately show up on streaming, linear, social, in a very efficient way in, like what you were saying, Jeff, in really relatively soon. A week you can make things happen very efficiently with, you have a creator talk about a product placement brand that all of a sudden show up in a very popular scene that happened to be seen. For us at Univision, we don't have reruns on prime time, and then they go on streaming, so you have a very captive audience. That's a great way to show up culturally, right? Where you don't have, for instance, something in culture per se, but all of a sudden you are, because you're in content. Great way to solve a problem of resources, and all of a sudden share of attention in a heartbeat, right? So turning that around could be pretty efficient.
Yeah. And there's been some scary sort of stats around, I think, the attention that people give during commercials now. I think Gartner had some numbers, Kantar had some numbers. 85% of people go do something else, look at their phone, make a cup of tea, leave the room, change channels. It's that keeping those eyes focused has become really challenging. So we're going to get into that a lot more, especially how, tying content in scene to those interstitial ad placements as well can be especially powerful. So for follow up to that question, so what hurdles then do you see when we talk about virtual product placement specifically? What hurdles are there to the adoption of that? Obviously, this is a new disruptive technology, and there's a steep learning curve for everyone. for agencies, for networks, for the brands. So what hurdles do you see in the adoption, and how can we sort of smooth its way in? Mara, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, and I think I'm sitting between the brand and the content. So I see on the content side what we hear a lot of the times, it's legal, talent restrictions. These are things that, because it's so new, that the contracts still don't own the rights for virtual product placement. And on the brand side, we hear a lot about measurement. So, and you could talk a little bit maybe to it.
I mean, that's a thing. I mean, what we're trying to do is to get this opportunity to be embraced as a type of media channel. And if you think about it, it kind of is. But for a brand to take dollars away from tried and true channels where they put $1 million in, they can expect what they're going to get out of it, into something new and different, we have to quantify the value of that somehow. And in the nascent days of where we are in this industry, we're trying to say, you know, if this is what a 30-second or 15-second spot is worth, here's an estimate of what a VPP is worth and some of the best, most culturally relevant programming that you can get in front of today. It's early days, but we believe that as more and more, shall we say, time and energy and dollars are committed to this, you know, the industry will figure out what success looks like for VPP.
Yeah, I mean, for us is to find the right product for the right brand, right? Or, you know, any brand that wants to come up, you know, where can they show up that feels clean, safe, right? It's not going to be a compromising scenario, which I think this is where the technology comes to play really well, right? Because through this technology, you can catalog, you know, a whole drama series, right? And then you know where your brand could show up, and you know it's going to be safe, right? Now, as in terms of rights, as you were talking, yeah, you just need to figure out, you know, who, you know, who's your partner for that, right? And, you know, we've had content partners where it's impossible to do that. They have all kinds of restrictions, but, you know, in our case, because we produce a lot of our own content, there's very few restrictions on where your brand could show up. In particular, it's really around talent. The talent doesn't want a brand in front of them. But once we clear that, it's very simple, it's very easy. So again, we try to make it as easy. I talked about resources for agencies and clients. We try to make it as easy as possible for agencies and clients to show up, right? And then the other portion is now, how do you combine this virtual product placement, right? Because, you know, I described Nike, right? Nobody talks about Nike because everybody knows what Nike is, right? But if you have a brand that doesn't know or is not that familiar with the consumer, there's multiple ways that you could definitely help that product placement be amplified, right? Whether it's if you're in streaming, do some overlays. Actually, you can do some lower end of the funnel to immediately learn about your brand, you know, through either, you know, click to cart or flow codes, things of the like, that you can immediately actually have that driver, right? But also you can have an influencer on social media or a content creator on social media talk about that brand or that scene, as I mentioned before. So it's just, I think it's just how you think about that ecosystem that you could build around product placement that all of a sudden make you super relevant, because it's going to be in front of popular talent, you know, big at scale content, right? So it's a great opportunity, but it's also complex. It's not necessarily easy for, you know, agencies and clients to say, hey, yeah, let's just do that, right? I mean, that's going to help me launch a product or build awareness about whatever I want to, but whatever story I want to tell. So it's that complexity of understanding all the multiple things that you can do in a very turnkey, easy way. And I hate to use the term turnkey because it feels like it's not as efficient or relevant for your brand, but it is simple in essence. It's just a matter of, you know, putting it all together, right? And how do you make your buy more efficient that way and tell your client, hey, I got you to own a whole week of prime time and streaming and social in a very efficient, effective way financially, you know, not only creatively, but also, you know, making your dollars work harder for you.
I think one of the things, and it's funny you say this, because what we hear a lot of times, it creates a flexibility and it creates a scalability that is needed. So in the past, of course, with traditional product placement, you had to ship it to the set, and sometimes you wanted to have the sponsor known because it needed to match the sponsorship, it needed to match everything together. But now, if you can do product placement afterwards, then you can build that whole media package together. You can build your socials. You could also target the audiences in a different way. Because if you want to have it on the second stream where there's a younger audience, you can place correct brands for a younger audience, where you can have on the mainstream where maybe there's an older audience, you can use other brands.
Yep. By the way, another thing that is super to your point, I mean, you know, in the past, you know, doing the traditional product placement or building story arcs, you know, with production, you don't know how that product is going to perform. With virtual product placement, actually, you can take a look at what's trending on, you know, for our case, streaming or ratings, and just say, you know what, instead of being here, I want to be there, and take advantage of that particular moment, right? Obviously, the story and the product needs to be right for your product, but that's another efficiency that people can take a look at, yeah.
And to take a cue from Luis, the convergence of my world of social media and being able to understand what are consumers talking about as it relates to this category. Yeah. Is it a handbag? Is it a belt? Is it an accessory? And then what color is it? What is the thing? And you know, social listening and social intelligence that we can listen to really fine tune that desired cultural relevance, to get it right in the moment that we have with the right content. And by the way, there is a bit of good news on the measurement side. While we don't have a tremendous amount of standalone, shall we say, metrics for success related to virtual product placement, we do have studies that when we marry product placement, virtual product placement, with advertising around the programming where the brand or product has been placed, there is strong brand metrics that show strong improvement in brand metrics when those two things occur together. So it's early days, but at least it's not just, you know, complete void of insight.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're going to come to a couple of questions in a bit, specifically around measurement, but also around regionalization and some of those challenges. Before we jump into the next section, we're about halfway through. Does anybody have any questions? Sometimes I like to sort of stop and just see if there's anything mid-flow.
Andrew.
And excellent, one over here. Can we get a mic over? Nikki's got someone covered there.
For virtual product placement, could you talk a little bit about the meta tagging and how that might be different from a traditional programmatic on social media? For example, you know, when you have a cereal box that's on a certain shelf, how do you tag that differently from a cereal box that's on a lower shelf, or more visible or less visible, lighting conditions, et cetera? You know, how should an advertiser think about targeting a specific piece of a VPP ad inventory?
Yeah, so once we have the content, we scan for thousands and thousands of data points. We use AI to do so, and then we find correct placements. So at this stage, we don't differentiate about the location, because a location, what we think is more important at this moment is context and continuity. Once it's in one place and that placement comes back, either in a flashback or a flash forward, people need to see it again. We do measure the lights so that it always is correctly placed, but it's all about context.
And I would say, to add to that, in our experience, kind of trying to plan for the best, most valuable opportunities to be present, the technology Mara referenced identifies VPOs, virtual placement opportunities. Yeah. And it would say there are X number per episode, per scene, per whatever. And then we look and try to figure out, is it a cereal box? Is it a can? Is it a poster on the wall? Is it, you know, where can we have the most impactful, but also most authentically relevant experience for the viewer? Again, we're talking about an uninterrupted brand experience, and I think that's the key value prop for any product placement.
Yeah, that's what the system does. Yeah. So, for instance, you're a shampoo brand. Where do you place a shampoo brand? You're not placing it in a kitchen. You're not placing it in a restaurant. You're placing it in a bathroom. So what our system does, it will find you every single bathroom in every piece of content. So if you say, I'm a shampoo brand, it funnels it down. So first you get all the bathrooms, then you say, this is my demographic, and then it funnels it down to the demographic that you need, the countries that you need, and eventually you get to pick between a certain amount of virtual placement opportunities. Now this can be for one channel, it can be across multiple channels. It's just what you would like to do with it. And we've got an interactive platform called Sphera, where we onboard people. And there's a piece for the content owner to approve the virtual placement opportunities. And the brand seek is sort of reverse engineering, because you don't want to go through every single placement and say, would that be a fit? If you're a car brand, you can't place it in a kitchen, you want a parking lot. So you will automatically, our system will already funnel it down to categories.
And one more.
Thanks a lot. This is fascinating. Yeah. Okay. So the opportunity with content visually, it's so compelling, it makes sense. And I heard what you said about not wanting to disrupt the integrity of the original content. At the same time, I'm thinking about the opportunities for speech and AI voices and things of that nature. Have you explored that technology? And
Yes, we do.
I'd be very curious to hear about that.
Yeah, so, and what do you mean exactly with speech?
So text-to-speech technology or
Yeah,
cloning
so what we
voices.
do, yeah,
'Cause as
so,
you change content, right? I mean, to
Yeah.
make it feel organic and original, there's also the modality around speech and voice, and I was curious
Yeah.
how you accommodate that.
yeah, so we also offer compliance in that sense, and we use speech to text to understand what the scene is about. Because when you have the different opportunities, you want to make sure that nothing is referenced what doesn't fit your brand at the same time. But also, we've got quite a lot of clients that have guardrails. So they say we can't do this, and for instance, it's like a simple thing, alcohol and minors can't do it, you know. Or some countries have nudity. We're a global company, but we use the speech to text to understand. It's the visual and the speech to text, and combine them, you get the context. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
All right, 7 minutes, 50 seconds to go. So let's let's go through our individual rounds. So to Luis, so specifically for you, so as the biggest Spanish language media company, you reach 54 million members of the Hispanic community weekly, not to mention your US social channels have over 70 million followers. So how do you see virtual product placement scaling across programming, especially internationally, because brands and audiences change as we cross borders?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest advantage we have is that we own about 80% of our content, in particular drama, so that makes it a lot easier for us to help any brand, show up. And then from the, we primarily focus on the US Hispanic audience, but we have the ability, because we distribute that content across multiple Spanish-speaking countries, so depending on where you want to be, we can help you broker that. And also, I mean, in terms of sophistication, I mean, the US probably will be the place that's easiest, because we have streaming. So you'll see our content on Prime linear streaming, and then if we want to expand and do amplification on social media, we can do that, right? So we can build or help build context to what you saw on entertainment, right, in particular, because this product is really well suited for entertainment. So, the way I look at it, for companies like mine, where we have, people know novellas and they think of soap operas, but they're really mini-series, beginning, middle, and end, 3 to 6 months each, never reruns on Prime. Really helps you to show up in fresh, on a duplicated audience, on a weekly basis. It moves to streaming within 2 days, right? So then your brand continues to show up on streaming, right? And then we can start working on targeting and do all other more complex stuff. Now, we can do that easier here in the US, because it's just more sophisticated, but if you want to show up in Latin America, that content will travel to Latin America, and we can help you through, in particular, streaming, to do that in a way that makes sense for your brand, right? So I think it's, to me, a very simple way to leverage the Hispanic market, which is huge now. As you've seen, it's the largest minority in the US. It's 60 million people. We reach a lot of them on a weekly basis. So very easy to put your brand in context just right off the gate by just showing up on prime time on a weekly basis, right? Because you can show up on sports, but you'll do that once a week, or very sporadically to do something rather sophisticated other than your spots and dots, right? But with this one, you can actually show up in context. You can actually make your brand really popular. You can actually create opportunities to talk about that, through social media, right? A lot of our prime time is untapped. So whoever really starts doing stuff with Ryff and us can definitely have a winning proposition right off the gate with this particular market.
Awesome. And then for Jeff, so Essence MediaCom, offices in 96 markets, you're managing over 20 billion in media spend for your clients. You're a business focused on creating breakthrough moments. So how do you see VPP complementing your client strategy? How should brands be thinking about it as they consider their media mix for 2024?
We've kind of taken an approach to the sort of changing landscape, which we refer to as the new communication economy. Radical change, the most radical and substantive change in media consumption behavior ever, quite frankly, over the last few years. And we're preparing for those changes in real time. And so when it comes to all the changes, and again, one of the things that sits at the core of our headspace every day is how do we help our clients become more culturally relevant? Less dependent on these disruptive advertising experiences, more sort of entangling the consumers in their day-to-day lives with messages from brands that, kind of complement without disrupting life. So this new communication economy and where VPP can sit in it, how do we plan for that? So if you think about the media team inside of our agencies, these guys are planning for every media channel. Social, TV, out of home, print, all of them. Can we add VPP to that list of things that we want to plan for as we plan our clients' money every year? Absolutely, and we should. Our Chief Planning Officer, Jason, he's met with you all and is thinking about how this can have a place in our planning process to really facilitate these breakthrough moments. So again, it's early days, but we need to understand what's our client's appetite for new innovation. How do we get money migrated from traditional channels into new and unproven channels? And then together, the industry all together, need to figure out how to define what success looks like. And again, I think we're going to baby step it, but once the sort of momentum hits a certain critical mass, I think it'll happen naturally, and everyone will feel good about, yes, this is why we moved 10% of our money over to VPP, because it's just working for us.
And I want to hit on that last point, and probably what will almost be our last question, because measurement and metrics remain, central to, just about all advertising in general, right? And I think meaningful measurement of return on your ad spend remains a challenge for VPP, but it's also TV advertising as a whole. So let's talk a little bit, just to wrap this up, talk a little bit about how we see this playing out, because you mentioned success. So how brands think about success, how should brands think about success when it comes to rolling out a VPP program, and what kind of measurements should we be looking at?
How do you define relevance? How do you define cultural relevance? Those are metrics that I think if you ask 20 different people in the room, you probably get, 18, 19 different answers. But for us in our world, for example, relevance is engagement as proxy for relevance, and that's measurable in most digital environments. Our obsession with proving the value of every dollar spent is something that is there's increasing pressure on that in today's economic environment, and we embrace it. We're not going to run from it, hide from it, but we want to embrace it and work with not just our clients and the brands, but also the media owners and the technology enablers to figure out how do we measure it and how do we quantify it. And there's a whole new parlance that will emerge in how we describe those things that doesn't exist today, most likely.
Every day. Mara, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think measurement has always been, I have a career of 25 years, but measurement has always been a challenging thing still on anything you do. But as you learn, it's so new, and as you learn, it will grow and grow and grow, and the insights will grow. And I think as long as you keep those measurements and learn again from what you've seen, what it happens, but I think especially the power of being able to mix your media package. And Louis was telling this wonderful story on the film Focus, where you can really play with people's heads. So Louis, you can tell the story better than I can.
Well, no, I was just referring to, subliminal, right, advertising.
Yes.
If you watch that movie with Will Smith, and there's a scene with B.D. Wong, in the Super Bowl, where they're betting for a bunch of things, and at the end, Will Smith is losing all the bets, but the one last bet that he was placing on was hey, what number of player are you thinking about? And if I guess it, I'll win. And he guessed it because he plays the number 55 in, for the entire day for BD1 to think about that. The way I look at, virtual product placement is that, right? Is that subliminal, you're seeing the brand all the time, so by the time you come to measurement, your return on ad spend will be that successful, right? Because people are going to be seeing your brand, so there's going to be, you're going to increase your brand love and brand consideration, whatever metric you're going for. I think that definitely is going to deliver on that. So I was just referring to that subliminal thing. It's kind of what you're doing with virtual product placement, is that subliminal thing where all of a sudden your brand will show up on multiple series, multiple time periods, on multiple platforms, and by the time you talk about your brand, it's going to be that much more relevant because people are seeing it constantly and all the time, and that's what you can do with virtual product placement. It's so much easier than the old-fashioned product placement where you have to work with producers and talent, and I mean, it just makes your life so simple now.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's us right at time. So thank you, Luis, Ma, Jeff. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for coming along.